Part 1. Sega Saturn, 1995. Sega shocked the world by surprise launching the Saturn early in North America, hoping to beat Sony's PlayStation to the market. But that surprise came at a cost. Developers weren't ready. The launch lineup was a mess. Games like Clockwork Knight and Daytona USA looked rough compared to arcade versions, running at half the frame rate with muddy textures. Even Virtua Fighter, which was supposed to show off Sega's 3D power, was plagued with frame drops and glitches. Players were confused, developers were angry, and retailers didn't even know the console was coming. The result? A rushed launch that set the Saturn up for failure from day one. Part 2, Nintendo 64, 1996. Now don't get me wrong, Super Mario 64 is a masterpiece, but that's basically all the Nintendo 64 had at launch. Its lineup in most regions was just Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings 64. 2 games. That's it. If you didn't care about Mario or flying simulations, your brand new console became an expensive paperweight. The reason? Nintendo switched from CD-ROMs to cartridges, making it harder for third-party studios to develop quickly. So while Mario changed gaming forever, the rest of the library was missing in action for months. Part 3, PlayStation 2, 2000. It's wild to think that the best-selling console of all time had one of the weakest launch lineups ever. The PS2's launch games looked barely better than PS1 titles. We're talking Evergrace, Orphan, Scion of Sorcery, and Fanavision. Yes, the fireworks simulator. Most developers were still figuring out the hardware, so early titles ran clunky and unpolished. The PS2 sold well thanks to hype and its DVD player, not because of its games. It wasn't until hits like Metal Gear Solid 2 and GTA 3 arrived that the PS2 truly became iconic. Part 4, Xbox 360, 2005. The Xbox 360 changed gaming, but its launch lineup? Mediocre at best. Microsoft hyped the console hard, but delivered mostly forgettable titles. Games like Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo, Elements of Power were supposed to be system sellers, but they felt outdated, relics of the Xbox and GameCube era. Perfect Dark Zero was especially disappointing. Stiff animations, bad AI, and a confusing tone. Even though Call of Duty 2 helped a bit, the overall lineup didn't feel next-gen. The 360 eventually redeemed itself, but that first impression left gamers unsure. Part 5, PlayStation 3, 2006. Sony came in confident, maybe too confident. The PS3 launched with a high price tag and games that didn't justify it. Titles like Genji, Days of the Blade and Mobile Suit, Gundam, Crossfire were technical disasters. Genji became infamous for its real battle on giant enemy crabs meme, while Gundam had frame rates that dipped below 10 FPS. Developers struggled with the PS3's complex cell processor, making most launch games look worse than Xbox 360 titles. It was a rocky start that Sony spent years recovering from. Part 6, Wii U, 2012. Nintendo's Wii U had a confusing marketing campaign and an even more confusing launch lineup. The console shipped with ports of games that were already available elsewhere. Mass Effect 3, Batman, Arkham City, Darksiders 2. There wasn't a single must-have exclusive. Even new Super Mario Bros. U felt like a rehash. The gamepad was innovative, but no launch title truly used it well. The lack of identity, combined with a weak lineup, doomed the Wii U before it could even find its audience. Part 7, PlayStation Vita, 2012. Sony's handheld powerhouse deserved better. The PS Vita had gorgeous hardware, but an underwhelming set of launch titles. Games like Little Deviants were tech demos disguised as full games, and while Uncharted, Golden Abyss looked impressive, it didn't have the magic of its console counterparts. Most other titles were ports or forgettable minigames. Gamers wanted a deep handheld experience, but the lineup didn't justify the price. Without killer exclusives, the Vita couldn't compete with mobile gaming or the 3DS, and it faded fast. Part 8, Xbox One, 2013. Microsoft shot itself in the foot before the Xbox One even launched, but the games didn't help either. Titles like Rise, Son of Rome, and Killer Instinct were visually impressive but shallow in gameplay. Forza Motorsport 5 looked great, but lacked content, and many features required constant internet connectivity. The focus on TV integration and Kinect made it feel like a media box, not a gaming console. The Xbox One eventually recovered after major policy changes, but its launch lineup was a major reason gamers initially stayed away. Part 9, PlayStation 5, 2020. Now let's talk modern day. The PS5 had a strong start hardware-wise, but its launch lineup, still mixed. Sure, Demon's Souls looked amazing, but many of the other titles, like Godfall and Destruction All-Stars, were underwhelming. Godfall, in particular, was marketed as the next-gen looter slasher, but felt repetitive and soulless. And since most games were also available on PS4, there wasn't much reason to upgrade immediately. It was more of a soft launch than a true showcase. Part 10, Xbox Series X/S, 2020. However, the Series X had almost no exclusives despite having all of the capability. The fact that there wasn't much new content to play was the primary reason why Microsoft relied so heavily on Game Pass and backward compatibility. Despite its shortcomings, the medium was hardly a game changer. The game that was supposed to be the centerpiece, Halo Infinite, was delayed, which meant that early adopters had very little incentive to show off their brand new machine. Ironically, the most powerful console in the world was released without a game that could definitively demonstrate its capabilities. Part 11, Atari Jaguar, 1993. When discussing subpar launches, it is impossible to avoid mentioning the Atari Jaguar. While it was marketed as the first 64-bit system, it was in no way a next-generation platform. In the launch lineup was Cybermorph, which, even by the standards of the early 1990s, appeared to be a dreadful-looking character. However, the graphics were murky, the action was repetitious, and the famed voice line, which asked, "Where did you learn to fly?" became a meme decades after it was originally released. As a result of the Jaguar's complex hardware, developers were dissuaded from creating titles for the console, which ultimately led to the Jaguar's status as one of the most unsuccessful video game consoles in history. Part 12, Nintendo 3DS, 2011. The 3DS eventually became a fan favorite, but its launch lineup was shockingly weak. There was no Mario, no Zelda, no Pokemon. Instead, we got forgettable games like Steel Diver and Pilot Wings Resort. Even Nintendogs plus cats couldn't carry the console. Sales were so poor that Nintendo had to cut the 3DS's price by nearly a third just months later. It wasn't until Ocarina of Time 3D and Mario Kart 7 arrived that things turned around. Part 13, the PS5's confusing cross-gen lineup. When Sony released the PlayStation 5 in 2020, gamers were expecting a showcase of true next-gen power. The console was sleek, fast, and built for the future, but its launch lineup didn't exactly scream next generation. Instead of jaw-dropping exclusives, the PS5 came bundled with cross-generation titles that were also available on the PS4. Games like Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and Sackboy, A Big Adventure, were fun, but they didn't feel like system sellers. Even Demon's Souls, while stunning visually, was a remake of a 2009 game. This left many early adopters feeling like they were paying premium prices for games that didn't really need the new hardware.